Welcome to 1 year of Trump. This is a panel discussion hosted by Be Civil, Be Heard. Physically, we are here at Missouri State University. Thank you for being thank you for joining us for this conversation. For the next 90 minutes, 85 minutes or so, we're going to be waxing political about the current administration. The current administration is a year plus old. That's a lot of time to get some stuff done and a lot of time to project for the future. So what we will be doing is talking about some of the successes of the Trump administration, as still nascent as it may be, some of the failures of it, and kind of trying to project where the future is going, where this administration is going to be taking us in the future. We have a panel here to discuss among ourselves, but also incorporate as many comments and questions from the crew. So please bring them if you have them. Raise your hand and you will be incorporated as soon as possible. But let me just introduce myself. My name is Andrew Crocker. I teach political science at OTC. We'll go ahead down the line.
All right. My name is Daniel Boehlmann. I am an instructor in the Department of Communication and Political Science at OTC.
My name is Evan Grosch. I'm a student at Missouri State University.
My name is Joan Barrett, and I am a fairly new political science instructor for OTC, and like you, just trying to become a more informed citizen.
Hi, my name is Christen Moore. I am a navigator for the Affordable Care Grant, Affordable Care Act. I am also a volunteer coordinator for Planned Parenthood, St. Louis, Missouri, in the St. Louis region, Southwest Missouri. Sorry, it's a hell of an acronym. And a founding board member of Southwest Missouri Now.
Okay, let me start off, guys, let's start broad for a bit before we start drilling down on some of the subjects that are interesting to us. One thing that was consistently said about our current president when he was running for office was that he was not a normal presidential candidate and would not be a normal president. We've had a year now. Anybody want to weigh in? Would you qualify the past year plus as a normal presidency or abnormal in what ways?
I would have to say completely abnormal. I think his use of Twitter would be one way in which it's not normal. And although Twitter is something that's new, Barack Obama was like the first president to really use it. The way he used it is vastly different than what our expectations would be.
In what way?
I think to use Twitter as a forum to quote Fox and Friends, or to insult the opposition, or to insult people of his own party, I don't think is what we would expect of a president in that kind of social media use. So I think that's at least one very obvious thing to point to say that it's not what we would consider normal.
Or I think I'm comparing it to how we all are kind of expected to behave in our regular day jobs. It's at the very least pretty unprofessional, the way he might speak to colleagues. So that's not normal. I think in my regular day job, I'd probably be reprimanded for as an agent of my institution of OTC and behaving in that way. So it's
If you were tweeting about me,
right.
Why is Mr. Crocker doing that?
Right. So Andrew
Disgusting.
and I we're colleagues, and so I just kind of go off the grid, lambasting a colleague that is whether it's true or not, because it would be probably. I'm just kidding, Andrew. True or not, it's at the very least not collegial. It's I consider it to be pretty unprofessional, and some actually kind of loses me on the content sometimes because I'm so taken with how you might speak to colleagues that way. So,
Evan, when we talk about how we feel about this president, the polling is predictably very partisan.
sure.
And Republicans generally approve of the job that this guy's doing, but if you parse it down, what is he doing? The Twitter account polls terribly, among Republicans even. So let's enter the upside down, and let's delete his Twitter account yesterday.
Okay.
If you remove the Twitter account from our conversation, which you shouldn't do, but for an intellectual exercise we will, is this still a normal presidency?
I would say that it is in a certain aspects of what he's done legislatively. It was predictable. I think of what most we would expect out of a GOP president, he's pretty much fulfilled, or he's attempted to fulfill rather. I would say the tax bill would have been pretty much predictable whether we had Donald Trump, Marco Rubio, or Ted Cruz. I think the same goes with the attempt at gutting Obamacare and the ACA. I think that was pretty much predictable as well. I think the appointment of Neil Gorsuch is another one that was probably just in line with that as well. So I think when you take it out of the vacuum of Twitter, a lot of what his moves have been are somewhat predictable. I would say his rhetoric is certainly not predictable. I would say that that's about as volatile as it gets. But I would say his policies kind of fall in line with the expectations of what we would expect a normal GOP candidate to do.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things we have to think about is actually, even historically, this presidency doesn't look that much different than some of the other presidencies we've seen, if you separate signal from noise. And that's the problem. There is a lot of noise with this president. The Twitter account, the just in general, the lack of communication
General
skills
chaos.
That surrounds the administration. If you take that noise out, this first year
so
doesn't
if-
look all that much
But-
different than even like
I would-
Clinton's
So if you
first.
take
I would say
out-
maybe legislatively, you're right, but I think there's a lot of things aside from Twitter that are pretty abnormal. Like, Jimmy Carter had to sell his peanut farm.
Right. And
That's violating a norm, the fact that he
and
has
that
not
is definitely different. But
separated himself from his businesses in those ways.
But
The
like-
fact that his
Family,
family or his closest advisors, the fact that his
Yeah.
son was just in India and selling dinners, the fact that people can go to Mar-a-Lago and buy a membership and that
Oh.
gives them access. I think
don't
that
think
all
nepotism's bad.
outside of the realm of social media is still abnormal.
oh yeah, no,
Sir.
yeah.
I haven't checked, but I would wager some amount of money on the fact that on the bet that this presidency has had the most advisors resign or be fired in a single year.
I want to take issue, a very minor issue with something that you said, Dan, because I agree with you and Evan that legislatively, it looks typical, but legislatively there's only so many ways you can wiggle.
Right.
But when you get, within the administration, it's not normal for the lack of, the number of people that work in the White House that don't have access to top secret clearance. That's not normal. The number of, sir, can I get your name? It's like Holland said, it's not normal to have so many people cycling in and out on a month-to-month basis.
Right.
So,
No, and I'll
The
agree with
turnovers.
you. I'll
Go
agree
ahead.
with you there.
Well,
It's, but some of the other things, like looking at, if you look back, and I'm not saying that they are anywhere nearly alike, but if you look back at like the first term of Clinton, he had a Democratic Congress, he had a Democratic Senate, and so theoretically he should have been able to run the table, still was unable to get health care done, things like that. So from a historical perspective, it's actually very similar to the Trump administration in that respect, where they run the table with both houses of Congress, the presidency, yet still can't get even some of their signature things done. Now, yes, there's a lot of things in the background within the office, people who can't get clearances because Lord knows what's inside of their background that the FBI and other agencies are going, no. That is definitely outside of the norm, and I think is troubles me.
Can we talk about that? Because if we're going to kind of focus in on the policy stuff, which is what I like to do.
Right.
The Trump administration's biggest policy pushes. What have they been? Aside from Gorsuch, which, by the way, is a resounding success for him, but his biggest policy pushes have involved trying to repeal the Affordable Care Act, what we call Obamacare, passing a very large tax cut which favored, corporations, and now currently trying and struggling to hammer out some sort of immigration deal. What does these are the three main things they've worked on for the first year plus. What does this tell us about this president's priorities? Anybody? What does this tell us about this president's priorities, and what are the next big things you expect this president to work on? Go ahead.
Well, I think policy-wise, I think the corporate tax rate was something that I really enjoyed about his tax plan. That's something that kind of pushed me over to supporting the GOP tax bill. If we looked at our corporate tax rate before the GOP plan, we were around 38.91%, which would put us at, I believe, the fourth highest corporate tax rate in the entire world. Now we're down
But
to...
how many corporations were actually, I'm sorry to interrupt, but actually paying that? Sorry to interrupt, but I feel like that's not the most accurate
Well, I would say that-
representation of what the corporate tax rate was. Amazon didn't pay any corporate taxes last year.
Well, that's also through deductibles and offshores. But I'm just saying on average, I would also compare that to Europe, who has an 18% average tax rate. So I think comparatively, I think you'd argue too that you'd rather have probably a European model of some form of government. Would that be true, that you would favor a system that would provide, I guess, a lower or higher corporate tax rate? I'm kind of confused on your indite there, because if we're paying so much more than everyone else, are you arguing that the deductibles are the
I'm
problem,
arguing
or-
that I think that, in theory, when you say a 38%, that we're paying more than everybody else, but I think in practice, that's not what's happening. And I think that's the argument
The
that I'm
listed
making.
corporate tax rate prior to reform was 35%. That put us, as Evan said, very, very high. With tax loopholes, I believe a study was conducted that said with loopholes and such, that they could take advantage of, that brings it down, brought it down, now that it's in the past, to 27, 28%, which is still on the higher end of things, but not as egregious as 35%. You were saying it?
Which I would then say that now that we're down to 21, that after deductibles, that would make us compatible or comparable to Europe. And I think that's a good thing. I think that corporate tax rates are important because I like what the corporations are doing. I think stock buybacks are a very important thing within corporations to stabilize our market. I think that's important. I think the fact that it's actually the market can now be influenced by me as a day trader posting a tweet about a company that I think is insider trading and then volatilely affecting that stock price of that company is horribly dangerous. And that's why I think stock buybacks are actually a pretty good thing. And I think the corporate tax rate, while we can disagree with a lot about Mr. Trump in regards to his unconvention, I think that the plan and its basis was better to solidifying the foundation of our economy.
So then let me ask you, everybody screamed and cried about the deficit and how big the deficit was. There's nothing about this tax plan that's going to make the deficit less.
I think the deficit just became a wedge issue. I don't think that was ever really something that was really bought into by
Oh, so they were
GOP
just
leaders.
screaming and crying to
I think that
plead
occurs on
to
both
talk to their
sides.
base, and they don't really have any
think
kind
so.
of value.
Yeah, I think both.
So
do
it's
that.
kind of egregious in that way too.
Joan, you look at these three major pushes that we've had policy-wise. What does that tell us about this presidency? Is there a future you see? What future policies we might be pursuing?
I think, I know there's so much talk, you mentioned, Andrew, immigration. I think it remains to be seen how that's going to all kind of pan out. I've seen, because of some of the undisciplined, frankly, on his part, talking, it's kind of a moving target, for a terrible analogy, but so I think it remains to be seen. I'm as curious as everyone here, and maybe some folks have some ideas on where we're going to head immigration-wise. But I think that's the next big fight.
What about internationally, Dan? The Trump administration, very rocky relationship, I think it's fair to say, with just about every ally that we've traditionally had. What does this portend for American policy now and potentially in the near future? Broad question.
I know. I think we're going to see a widening gulf with our traditional European allies because I think we are largely looking at an administration that is more interested in a kind of historic, I hate to use the America first, but basically a retrenchment at home. I think we're going to see a pullback from our international posture. Whether that be, I don't think we'll see a retrenchment as much militarily as I would have thought a year ago, based on his rhetoric. I think we'll see a policy retrenchment. I think we are going to see an increase in relationships with countries that weren't normally on our holiday list. Especially because
I don't even know if they celebrate the same holidays.
Oh, they don't. But basically, I think we're going to see a increase in relationships with some countries that could be charitably described as authoritarian, because this administration seems to have an interest in those sorts of personalities, and I think it's personality-driven international relations rather than policy-driven.
Kristin, anything stand out to you about foreign policy during the Trump era so far?
I just think it's, again, against the norms, is that it's interesting that his daughter was the one who's in South Korea discussing the newer, harsher sanctions against North Korea. It's not the Secretary of State, it's not an expert in the field in any way.
Career diplomats.
Right, it's somebody who ran a shoe company. So,
That is one of the most bizarre change-ups of this particular presidency is the marginalization of the State Department.
Yeah.
The State Department has been ridiculously understaffed. The Secretary of State has an adversarial and completely ineffective relationship with the president. Where does that leave us?
I think what it does is it makes our ability to use that soft power and those less than it has been.
When you say soft power, what do you mean?
I mean, like those diplomatic things, those relationship building, the meetings, and all of that. We're not going to have the influence that we have had in the past overseas, just by virtue of being the United States, and we have this big power in the world, and we can kind of make you do things we want to do. That soft power, we're going to lose that because we don't have an effective State Department, because it's understaffed, because embassies are empty. We're just going to lose that ability.
Well, and we're not investing in foreign aid like we have in the past.
Right.
And you have, and I'm not going to remember who all right now, but one of his own generals, as he likes to refer to them, said, you know, basically, you've got the State Department budget. You are going to have to spend that much more on bullets for me, because we are able to use things like our foreign aid budget and to project power and to prevent military interaction that is going to be much more costly in blood and treasure for us than it would be if we had just invested a little bit in diplomacy.
Can we ask ourselves how big of a deal this is, though, the marginalization of the State Department? I understand that it's a radical change, but here in 4 years and potentially here in 8 years, by the end of the Trump administration, America is still going to be the biggest gun on the block. We're still going to be the biggest economy on the block. People are still going to want to deal with us and to a certain extent look at us for leadership. So to what extent is this really degrading what we're going to get? I know a bunch of the theoretical stuff. It means America's, symbolism will weaken. Sure. What does this practically lead to?
You know, I think about when you talk about understaffing, you mentioned it, Kristin, and in all of our locations all around the world, we can't underestimate the day-to-day diplomacy that's going on in small ways, those ripples, and those are relationships, pretty low levels sometimes in governments with our friends and adversaries, and that we cannot take steps back in that, because I think practically it makes all future, just even small decisions, very, very difficult. We're going to have to rebuild, I'm afraid, quite a number of those relationships.
Okay.
And I think to your question is also, if we're not there doing those things, other people will be, other countries will be.
Yeah.
And so we're opening the door for our influence to be eroded and China's influence to be bigger. And I think that is going to be the biggest impact that we see at the end of this 4 years.
Because I think, to follow on with that, you're seeing that with the Belt and Road Initiative, where they're basically spending enormous sums of money to create infrastructure links in and around China, where there are countries that would traditionally be within our orbit of influence, where they're going to have stronger trade links and stronger communication links and things like that with China. And at least in that part of the world, I think we will see our power erode, and China will have a claim towards the power that we would have had.
I really do think that some of it is a bit overblown. I prefer a stout State Department, but I think, I think America, to the point, economically and militarily, is almost weak State Department proof. However, I am a little concerned when it comes to stuff like the Paris Climate Treaty. Paris Climate Treaty is an area, climate change was an area where America theoretically was leading.
Yeah.
And now it seems that maybe China's taking the reins.
Well, and I think if you look at that, and then all the states that have taken over and said we're going to do this, well, what image is that projecting to the rest of the world?
Evan?
And that we're not
I also think
united.
that he also just leaked that I think Trump is talking about renegotiating the Paris Climate Accord, which I think is his big thing, is what his big initial kind of critique, if we can kind of give it into one simple phraseology, would probably be that he didn't feel it had teeth. I think that's fair. Is that what everyone would probably say when Trump's biggest assertion against it was?
The critique wouldn't be that he doesn't believe that it's happening?
I think that could be part of it, depending on how cynical you wanted to view some of Trump's statements. But I think a lot of his criticism came down to that it actually held no water. I mean, there was no penalties for violating the Paris Climate Accord.
Well, I think his also a lot of it was that he felt that we were doing more than other countries
Right,
were,
which is more than our fair share.
and also like proportionally, that's
Yeah.
not even super accurate.
But I think that was true compared to China, which is one of the worst ones of coal. I mean, I think coal is one of the biggest problems in China, as it is in America, I'd say as well. And I think Trump's not going to necessarily go that far as to recognizing coal as a pollutant, I don't think. But I think that what he could do, hypothetically, is you could be wrong. You could be wrong and right in the same sentence. I think that it's possible that Trump could renegotiate a Paris Climate Accord, providing some sort of sanction for violation on, let's say, greenhouse gas emissions, and that could ultimately be a good thing. And I think that he could be wrong and right at the same time.
I mean, but I don't know. Could he renegotiate it when no one else is willing to?
I think
they
they
all
could-
just said, "Okay, cool, see you."
I think if countries
I mean, like-
prioritize climate change, I think they would reasonably expect to come to the table if they viewed that as a priority. I mean, if you're saying that the United States was now taking a step back because everyone else views it as a priority, assumedly us coming to that table would be something they would take notice of.
Evan, I am concerned, and I'm concerned that, I'm not convinced. I don't know where the president, what he believes. He has tweeted, I mean, it's in the diplomatic chiseled stone of Twitter that he believed it was a Chinese hoax. And he's never renounced that. I'm concerned that because the stuff you're saying is fair. I don't know how representative it is of the administration.
Yeah.
I think that he's I think one of the things is we have to separate his rhetoric from his actions a lot of times. And I think that's important, is I think he will get on stage and I think he will say whatever he needs to say to get that crowd to go insane and go crazy and scream his name, whether it be lock her up or something, egregious. But I think that's part of his game. I think also if you look to even his foreign policy, like you said, he's very hands-off. I think that's another thing kind of goes untraditional of other presidents, is that he really doesn't have a role in day-to-day operations. That's pretty clear, even if you look to his military, the way he handles his military. One of the things he no longer gives clearance for rules of engagement. He does not clear whether or not we're actually going to engage in opposition, which, depending on how you interpret that, is either a good thing or a bad thing. One, that gives you faster reaction times if you're pro-military, or two, that could increase the odds of miscalculation if you're probably foreign policy. So I think it's really interesting the way kind of he evaluates it. So I think it's tough.
I think it's tough too. It's even tougher if you're a starving polar bear and your polar ice cap is vanishing beneath your feet. And that's my main concern is that he has said that I believe he has said before that he doesn't think Paris climate change is fair. But he's also said that he doesn't know if it's an actual problem.
Right.
And so I just don't know where to go with that.
Well, but at the same time,
And it makes me worried.
Well, at the same time, and I can't believe I'm saying this, but his companies and the head of his companies have argued that climate change is a problem because they needed to build a seawall around one of their golf courses in Scotland, if I remember correctly. So
Just having a conversation.
So it's one of those things. I would agree with Evan. He's saying what he thinks he needs to say at the time. I don't know if he actually has a true North Star on this issue. I don't think he does. I think he's going to say what he is told is going to be popular with his base.
My problem with not having a true north is that it makes the path of least resistance the really attractive option. Mm-hmm. And the least resistance you're possibly going to get is giving polluters carte blanche to do it.
Doing that. Well, I hate to say it this way, but that's what most politicians take. What's going to be the easiest direction for me to get reelected or to get whatever I want? And so that doesn't surprise me.
Kristin?
I think something Evan said kind of struck me was that you have to separate his rhetoric from his actions, and I think when we can't. When the President of the United States says things, there's meaning, and that is an action. When he says things like, something I follow closely is the Affordable Care Act, and not to change the subject completely, but he says things like Obamacare is dead. People think that there is no penalty for the tax to not have insurance, right? The tax bill did take care of that, and there won't be, but there won't be next year. There will be this year. So there's thousands upon thousands of people who think I don't have to pay that penalty, who are going to be very shocked when they file their taxes. So I would argue that in some ways his rhetoric is action. And you can't separate those two things. You can say he's just talking to his base. Well, he's not president of his base.
Well, that's true, but I think when we're making predictions, it's tough to separate I think you need to separate his rhetoric from your predictions on what Trump was eventually going to do. I think that his rhetoric is not a roadmap for his future policies. I think that's kind of the issue that we're getting at. I think it is. There's problematic rhetoric causes a lot of problems, especially I would say within foreign policy, but like you mentioned, domestically. So I think that's true, but I think whenever we're trying to see what he's going to do next, I think it's really tough to follow his rhetoric as a roadmap. But you're
Yeah.
right.
I agree, but
because
I
it
would
goes
ask.
back and forth so quickly.
But what
That's true.
what other part of life, back to practical issues, what other part of life are you allowed to separate rhetoric from action?
Right.
Where else is that forgivable?
You are, and I don't think
We've
it is.
normalized that,
Yeah.
or we're trying to.
To my 2-year-old, my rhetoric does not match my actions at all.
I know, don't hit anybody.
Yeah, I will. I am a smoke machine with my 2-year-old. Ma'am.
Is there any reason to think that unpredictability is a good quality in a United States president?
You know, I was thinking about this a lot in the last year, particularly when it came to the war of words between our president and North Korea. And to a certain extent, North Korea's ability to exert a lot of stress over American life is the fact that our actions diplomatically with North Korea are very predictable. They will say something egregious, we will shame them. They will fire off a rocket, we will analyze what that rocket actually did, and we'll shame them some more. So maybe upsetting the apple cart, I know it's a nuclear war we're flirting with, but maybe upsetting the apple cart, maybe there are worse options than that. But I don't know what the answer to that question is.
Are you suggesting that having an unpredictable dictator and an unpredictable United States president is good?
I don't think they're unpredictable. I don't think North Korea is unpredictable. I think this is a regime that's been able to stay in power for 50 years, exercising the same tactics consistently. I think, to pull a little Marco Rubio, I think they know exactly what they're doing. And in a way, by rattling our impotent saber back at them, kind of, I don't know, crystallizes how useless their repeated threats are.
So
I don't know if that's an answer.
I feel like your answer was saying that North Korea is predictable and our president is not.
Yeah, I wouldn't
And
say
if
that's
that's
ideal.
not a problem, I don't know what it is.
I also think, though, that the foreign policy on the North Korean issue is going to remain pretty stable. I think we're going to have I think we're either going to go to deterrence. I think that's probably going to be where he's going to stay at until proliferation occurs, and then we would issue a first strike. I think that's ultimately the biggest fear, is that we just got word that I think they're selling, I think it's chemicals. There were, I don't know, banned chemicals to Syria. I think I just read that the other day.
Yeah.
So I wonder if they already have nuclear capabilities, what's next? And I think that becomes the fear scenario with Trump is, would Trump initiate a first strike if he had evidence that they were proliferating nuclear weapons to either terrorist or terrorist-like state actors? And that becomes where I think the argument of his predictability definitely comes into fold, and where we worry because we don't have a hard line.
Well, I don't like to
we've
think
been told
about.
those weepons were there before and they weren't.
I don't like to think about any of that at all. Let's change the subject.
I think there's a hand up.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I was hoping to bring up the deferred action for childhood arrivals that Trump initially started talking about. Well, he had Sessions start talking about. This was one of the few things that wasn't announced by a tweet was the supposed rescinding of the
Of
executive
DACA,
action
yeah.
under Obama that deferred immigration action on people who had been brought to the United States as children and grew up here, provided they registered with the government, paid $500 a year, had perfectly clean records, and like stayed better citizens than we expect from natural-born citizens. And then Sessions decided, hey, or Trump decided to have Sessions go, hey, we're not doing that anymore. Congress can make a rule, and we're going to repeal it. That has not been in any way a thing that any previous president would have done in that way, in that fashion. They would have not left a large section of, well, not many people, not a large percentage of the American workforce who don't know if they will be able to legally work in the country next year. Who knows?
Holland, right?
Yeah.
Holland raises an interesting question. Let's broaden it briefly. What do we foresee immigration policy looking like for the remainder of the first term?
It seems like there's a lot of agreement on how to go forward with DACA. So
Yeah.
I kind of wish they would, I wish they would leave that as a kind of a single issue and and just kind of handle it. But here we are. I don't see that happening.
I mean-
And I think, right, the Trump administration has lost some court cases on it. But again, it's that unpredictability as these people's lives are in limbo, and to live your life every day not knowing what tomorrow is going to be is difficult.
Well-
Because I think, right, like March 6th was the original.
Right.
Then you
So, 5th?
Yeah.
Early March, yeah.
So which is just right around the corner. And I think the longer it draws out and the more people live in limbo, the bigger of an issue it's going to be. And maybe the more likely it is that they will handle it as a single issue now. But my fear is that it'll just continue to be a bargaining chip.
Kristen,
for other
I'm sending a bill to your desk for you to sign or veto.
Okay.
It extends DACA indefinitely, and it funds $25 billion for a wall structure on the southern border. Sign or veto?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to sign it because I think what is going to happen is you can sign that and say it's going to get funded, and then after the midterms, a new Congress can come in and say we're not funding it.
So you're sabotaging.
So,
Evan, I'm sending a bill to your desk.
I would agree. I'd sign
The
it.
bill extends DACA indefinitely, builds a border wall. You sign it, you veto it.
I would sign it. I think that he doesn't have the fortitude to fight DACA and drain that out. I think, especially with the midterms, you don't want to mess with that. It's going to become a wedge issue because the stories behind it are going to become plastered on the news. You want that out of there immediately.
Joan, I'm sending a bill to your desk.
Same
I'm
bill?
extending DACA indefinitely. I'm building a border wall, and I'm embracing policies that will slash legal immigration 50%. You sign, you veto. President, Mr. President.
Oh, God.
That's what this president, that's what
Yeah.
this administration's fighting for, or has fought for until it collapsed.
That would be a tough one for me to sign.
Why?
Say the very last part that you added on.
Yeah, I
He
didn't
would
get the last
embrace
part.
a series of policies that would slash legal immigration roughly 50%.
That's troublesome.
Yeah, I don't feel like I had that.
Yeah.
Because honestly, I think the first part, as we said with DACA, I think there's support all across both sides of the aisle. I think even for the wall, there's still enough support where you could kind of live with that. I think slashing existing policies and practices right now for immigration that would decrease by 50%, that's troublesome when we don't have a lot of evidence to indicate that those are immigration, they're not presenting issues once they're in the country.
Dan, 5 years ago, the debate was over illegal immigrants. What do we do about these people? Fast forward to today, the debate is not about illegal immigrants. It's about whether we slash legal immigration. What's going on? Why are we having this conversation?
Why are we changing from worry about illegal immigration to legal immigration?
Because we're doing what Dan said and we're retreating.
Well, it's not just that. It's also there is a specific strain of I'm going to say white ethno-state nationalism that we see, not necessarily within this president himself, but within some of the people around.
Yeah, I think so.
Because I don't know. But there is an idea, and I think part of it is we are looking at an America that is becoming more diverse and is changing demographically. We are seeing more people check other or say, I'm Caucasian, but I'm also, and that is troublesome to some people and scary to some people. I don't know why, but it is. And so what we are seeing is trying to put in policies in place that will cement current demographics, or at least extend the time that the current demographic majority keeps that majority. They are afraid of a changing America.
Evan, are we cementing demographics? Is that what this is about? It seems cynical.
I think we're definitely becoming more tribal. If we're talking about within our political, I think a lot of what we saw in 2016 was a very tribal-oriented politics, and I think we've seen that kind of manifest itself throughout the first year of the Trump administration. I think we're seeing two parties which are, I think it'd be kind of dishonest for me to say that there isn't a faction of the Republican Party that's certainly embracing the alt-right, that's embracing this sort of ethno-nationalist state, which would be a white kind of nationalist state, would probably be the best way to describe it. But I think on the left, there's also this coalition that's kind of forming of a lot of radical left movements, and I think they're kind of coming into the fold as well, that we've seen. So I think it's just fracturing almost of our political policies. Now, it's interesting to see whether or not these groups actually play a major role as they kind of did in 2016 moving forward, or whether or not they fall back into kind of the abyss of politics.
Joan, can we talk Russia for a while? Can we talk it?
Sure,
All
talk
right.
it.
With the pall hanging over the Trump administration's first year, the FBI's special counsel investigation into Russian interference in presidential elections, and any alleged collusion the Trump campaign may have had, and any crimes stemming from those investigations. What's the end game here? Where are we going?
For me, I'm not a Russian expert, so I'm interested to hear
You're not?
everyone's. Nope, check the box on that one.
Okay.
I would say, collusion or not, right?
Yeah.
That remains to be seen. That's what an investigation is for, just to demonstrate some of these indicate that could be a possibility. But this behavior is really just a threat overall to our democracy, and that's the end game, is solving that. It doesn't end. They're only getting more sophisticated potentially. Am I heading in the right direction? I mean, does anyone want to jump in on that one?
Well, I think part of the whole thing that I'm not an expert on Russia, but I do listen to a lot of podcasts. But
There you
I
go.
will say that
Same diff.
part of the genius
Same.
of it is that they call it collusion. It's not collusion. That's not really like a thing that exists, right? Like collusion
What do
would
you
be
mean?
because collusion would be two football teams that are supposed to be rivals getting together and saying, "Hey, we're gonna do whatever with a spread." I shouldn't use sports analogies because I don't know anything about sports. But that's collusion, right? But what's being alleged isn't collusion. What's being alleged is interference in our election. What's being alleged is things like them being susceptible to blackmail, undue influence, those things. But the fact that they keep even saying collusion is very smart on their part, because you're right. They're never going to prove collusion.
Probably not.
Because that's not really what's at issue.
And it's not
Oh,
a
sorry.
crime, and it's not, there's no
Right.
federal crime against it.
Right.
So, I mean, we're looking at.
But all the
like-
things that
So
point
the
toward a
fact
big.
that we keep
Not for
framing it in that
collusion.
way is playing that game
If
with
you
them that we should
receive
be
an item,
playing.
if you receive an item of value for a foreign country,
That would be,
Quote.
well, and also a violation of campaign finance laws. But like the whole idea of, would you mind helping me out? But that kind of stuff, that is actually, there is. no
Right, nobody
law.
goes to
There is
jail
no
for
federal
collusion.
law against that.
Right.
Evan?
I think it's going nowhere. I mean, I don't think the Russian investigation is ever going to meet the standard of quid pro quo. And I think that at that point, just because they got a FISA warrant and they were able to do certain things to look into the information, they were able to get some indictments down there, I don't think it's going to do anything. I don't
Well-
think it's gonna do
Indictments,
enough.
there's 32 indictments.
I don't think they're going to be able to get to the top. I mean, I don't think they're going to be able to get to Trump. I don't think there's a quid pro quo on Trump's behalf. Otherwise, they'd probably already have it.
well, even if there isn't a quid pro quo, that doesn't mean it's not going nowhere.
That's
There's
true.
also
Is
an
it a house
and
of cards?
And I also think you say otherwise they already have it. Watergate took a long time.
A couple years.
I mean,
Well, but-
these investigations take time. They clearly have to dot their I's and cross their T's. They're not playing.
It's the obstruction issue.
And the
So-
obstruction, and you don't have to have
Obstruction.
committed a crime. He doesn't have to be obstructing a real crime. He just has to be trying to.
Your comment?
They won't get this necessarily on collusion or espionage. It's the obstruction. You're not allowing the investigation to go forward to find out what happened. That's what happened to Nixon.
Do you know
Right.
that in
They
2000?
got him on anything else, but he obstructed justice.
Do you know in 2018, we still do not have legal confirmation that, Nixon authorized the breaking of laws. That has never been settled. It never went to court. What did we bust him on? We busted him on obstruction. The cover-up is worse than the crime sometimes. So
Right.
that's kind of an interesting observation.
Yeah. Well, and I think honestly, the whole, and I think the idea of trying to find out if there was collusion between the Trump campaign and Russia is important too. But I think what's more important is we need to be looking at the fact that whether or not they were colluding, they were also trying to get into the election databases for almost every state, which would not basically allow them to change vote totals, but would allow them to change who's registered and who's not. They are